Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast at the Edinburgh Fringe. I'm Thos Ribbits, and in this episode I'll be talking to David Kingsmill as we do a roundup of some of the shows that I didn't get to see but he did, as well as talking about his fantastic 5-star show Out of the Lens. And to get you in the mood throughout the programme, and here at the start, we'll be hearing extracts of the newly recorded album of that fantastic show, Out of the Lens, which is available to download on iTunes, or you can buy a physical CD from various online outlets.
On a morning a day ago, everything was slow. And I didn't have inspiration or resolve. Now I'm getting back to work, not allowed to shirk. 'Cause I'm forcing my lethargy to dissolve. When the creative spark alights, then I begin to set my sights on a target in the heights of my ability. With my camera in my hand, I can do what I planned. It becomes a goal and a possibility. But despite the way I'm feeling, I'd still have the blues if I hadn't had the luck to find the perfect muse. Sure, a portrait is okay, pretty much any way that you take it, but to make it something rare, you can't think in the box, must use Picasso's blocks and craft something new with tender love and care. When I'm working on my art, before I even start, I don't have to tear apart the institution, but I need to know inside I can do what I decide and be the best when I provide my contribution. Still, with all the best intentions, it's not hard to lose. If you haven't got a subject, that's the perfect muse. People say that regular creation is key to a true artist's liberation. But I believe you also need one last component to be freed. Then with practice, skill and patience, you're a new sensation.
David.
Hello, sir.
How lovely to see you outside of the Edinburgh context.
Indeed, yes.
For you, at the time of this recording, Edinburgh was over about a month ago.
Just under.
But for you, it's lingered, hasn't it, until really the end of September?
Somewhat, yes.
So let's talk first, I think. We're going to be galloping through some of the shows that you saw, but I think we ought to start with the show that you wrote. Although we discussed it already on Musical Talk, your fantastic show, I'm showing my colours here, Out of a Lens, was one of the 3 best shows I saw in Edinburgh.
Oh, that's very kind of you, thank you.
And it is that which has sort of had legs following Edinburgh. So let's talk about Out of the Lens.
Indeed.
How shall I describe it? Because it wasn't on for the full run, was it? You took 2 shows up.
I did. So I did the play that I wrote, started on, well, not technically I think you can start on the Thursday. I started on the Friday.
Pretty much the beginning of the Fringe.
Pretty much the beginning, and ran for the next 2 full weeks as well. And then this started in, well, what in Edinburgh terms is called week 3, which is actually the second full week, and ran until the end of week 4. So it had a 2-week run.
Yeah.
But it did not begin at the very beginning of the festival, which actually in retrospect was a mistake, but because you get legs in week 1 that we didn't get. Yeah. A lot of people come up at the very beginning, and you can get a lot of word of mouth and a lot of locomotion out of that first week that we missed out on, which was a shame.
Oh, so the first week is useful for foundations?
It is, yes, and that's a lesson. I mean, this is, I've done 2-week runs left, right and centre, but they've always started at the beginning of the Fringe, and this is my first time starting a show in week 2, and I do feel like our audiences suffered as a result.
Well, that's interesting.
And by our audiences, I mean our audience numbers, not the audiences themselves. I sincerely hope.
The audiences didn't suffer in any way. I'm not going to say the great surprise, because I knew what was coming in a sense, but what I really liked about the show was its integrity. It was essentially a relationship between two men.
Yes.
We briefly described that in the previous show. A straight photographer and his gay muse.
Mm-hmm.
The gay muse is a bit, shall we say, saucy.
Yes.
What I really liked was the fact that their relationship with each other changed and morphed, but became a really good, solid set of friends over the trials and tribulations of the play. I'm keeping this fairly vague, because obviously we'd like people to see it or hear it.
Absolutely.
But it was a great show. I think it's your best show.
Thank you.
And I liked it from beginning to end. It was, in a way, it was a revelation. So I think in terms of the quality of your writing, you found a voice. And it is an excellent voice, and I would like to see more of it. But how was your experiences of Out of the Lens during the... it's all very well for me to rock up, watch it, go away saying, that was a jolly good show, 5 stars. And those are legitimate 5 stars, not because I know you or knew you beforehand. It was because the show was worth 5 stars. But the experience for you on the ground, as, the man on the spot, looking after it, looking after the advertising, being there every day...
Yeah,
that's a different experience, isn't it?
The thing is, I think, and this was, sadly, as is so often the case with Edinburgh, a financial restriction, was I ended up doing a lot of jobs. My intention, my hope had been to be able to go in as the writer and go, here's my show, have some fun. But of course, that's never going to happen. I unfortunately had a slightly discouraging experience with a producer in the past, and therefore I decided not to hire one, which meant I had to be it.
Yes,
which
multitasking.
I have discovered since I do not enjoy producing one bit. I'm apparently quite good at the organisational side of it. I'm not quite so good at knowing necessarily everything that I've got to do, so it was a bit of a stress doing that.
Also, you can be good at something and not enjoy it.
Well, this is true, and I think really, I have found myself as a writer now, and it slightly galled me that I had to do something else.
Yes.
But of course, that's my choice. I want to put the show on, I have to do something with it. I did the lighting design for the show, which I actually did quite enjoy. It wasn't entirely off my own back. I did have a meeting with a lighting consultant and talk it through, but I sat there with our technician and designed the show, which was I actually really enjoyed. The advertising bit of it is hideous, but then that's Edinburgh for you.
Yeah, it's not just hideous for you, though, is it?
No, that is the biggest challenge in Edinburgh, and I think I've said this before. I can't remember if I've said it on Musical Talk, but I feel like Edinburgh has passed critical mass, and it has now reached a point where it's actually too big for its own boots.
Yes.
It's still the best place to get seen. The number of producers and promoters and agents and everybody else that flock into Edinburgh every August is immense, but unfortunately so is the number of shows. There were over 3,000 this year. I worked out in order to see everything you'd have to see, I think it was something like 119.2 shows a day. If you were actually to see everything in the time available, which is just, it's inviable.
It is now the point, I agree with you very much, that it's been getting bigger and bigger over the last few years. Yes, because in 2012 it was a bit more bite-sized, only fractionally so, but because of the Olympics being on at the same time, but fewer shows went up and fewer people came. Because they spent their money on the Olympics or were bagging drums for Danny Boyle.
Yes,
so it was just a little bit more contained, still too big really to navigate, but it felt there was more ownership, if you like. And you felt you could. 2013 was the complete reverse, where everyone who hadn't gone in 2012 came along, as well as all the people who would have come along anyway. So I thought 2013 was a ridiculously sprawling year. This year didn't feel, although it was bigger, it didn't feel as big as 2013 or as unfocused as 2013, right. But I do know what you mean. It is simply now almost a random selection that you get to see. You see what, basically, how you decide to see which shows is either word of mouth from other people or from the blurb. And if a blurb has been very well written, it might be the most appalling show. But if it's got a well-written piece of PR, then you're likely to go and see it. And certainly I was the victim of that on a few occasions.
Yeah, as was I. Well, I will also throw in 2 other ways. I think there is also, of course, course, the element of knowing shows.
Yes.
Now, I didn't get to see this. I have just recently listened to your episode where you discussed the show with two of the actors, of course, being the Drowsy Chaperone.
Oh, fabulous.
Which I absolutely adore, and I met the chaps on the Mile a couple of times and got chatting to them, and I very much wanted to see it, and I failed. But lesson for Edinburgh people, doing 2 shows is way more than twice the work of doing 1.
Yes,
it's more like doing 3 shows, because you've got to keep yourself organised between the 2 as well. So that was a misjudgment that I made, and will not make again. But yeah, I think that's another way. So I think a popular show, and Anything Goes, of course, you spoke to in the same episode, they're shows that people know, and, you know, the production could be dreadful, although it sounds like it wasn't at all in either case. I didn't see either one. But
it could be.
At least you know what you're walking into.
Yeah. Established shows really bring their own advertising, don't they?
Well, they do, although that's going a little bit meta, because I think that's becoming a problem in musical theatre, is that established shows are the only thing, even in London, that are really succeeding at the moment.
Yes.
But that's another whinge for another day. The other thing I think is effective advertising. And I use the word effective very, very advisedly, because it has to be top-notch to really stand out.
Yes, it does.
Now, whether that is, well, for example, my Dracula thing, where they had the poster of Dracula eating the cello that I mentioned.
Yes, you did. Yes.
Which, I am exaggerating that, by the way, he wasn't literally chewing through the wood. But
the moment you described it, because I didn't see the show, but I remember the poster, because there was a topless chap, as you say, doing extraordinary things to a string instrument.
To be slightly more descriptive about it, he was holding the cello in front of him, and his mouth was on a level with the top of the neck.
Yeah.
And he just had his mouth open like he was about to bite it. And there was something so striking about that. And I think something like that works. I think if you get these really, really effective flyers who know their show, have a good way of selling it, and can put the gist of it across to you. And often, actually, if you get a really good quality flyer, that speaks for the quality of the show as well.
The converse situation is to rely entirely on your posters and flyers being stuck on the now limited opportunities for postering on the wall, because the council, I suspect, has narrowed the opportunity, and indeed the venues themselves, because even down in Teviot Square, where they used to have big green billboards on which there were ordered posters, but they were all the A4 size. Yeah. Now they're sponsored by a local newspaper in that part of the country. They're all A0 size, but it does mean that only the big shows who have done the sponsoring of getting the advertising. You're not allowed to advertise quite rightly in a graffiti style, so you can't just fly poster on the back of post boxes or anything exciting.
Thank heavens for that.
Yes, but the only real opportunities are on the advertising pillars, which are down the mile. And the problem is, I actually was talking to somebody. He just put his flyers on the wall. He came and spoke to me for 10 minutes on the mile, and by the time we got back, they had all gone. They'd all been pasted over with new, and I tell you what, these pillars were very softly quilted by this stage.
Oh, good heavens. And I think by the end of it, I was looking at one at the end, and of course, very few people actually take up step ladders or anything like that. So the top is usually fairly limited. And I believe that the diameter of the pillar had grown by a foot.
Yes.
By the end of the Fringe. I mean, there's so much stuff packed up. And the average lifespan of a poster is estimated to be 7 seconds.
Really?
So 10 minutes is doing quite well. Fortunately, we had these boxes as the set for Out of the Lens, and we doubled them as step ladders so we could get up quite high. And there are about 8 to 10 groups probably this year who could get up high enough to threaten us.
What I noticed more, actually, was post-show flyering.
Yes.
So I went to see a few shows, and then as I came out, I was offered flyers, sometimes from people who I knew or had interviewed. And so they will be kind enough to stop for a chat, and they would say, yes, what we've done is we've worked out that this show is of a similar style or a similar theme, or at least we think the audience would have similar interests.
Yes.
So we wondered if it's the kind of thing that, they were trying to capitalise on, I suppose what you might call focusing their advertising on specific groups.
I think it's a very effective method. I think if you've got the balls to do it, and some venues throw you out for doing so, entry flyering is even more effective. Because if you're exit flyering, everybody's leaving, whereas if you're entry flying, they're stuck in a queue, which means you've got much more scope to actually stop them, talk to them, and explain things. Now, for my part, and I'm extremely bad Edinburgh publicity person in this sense, I am very discomforted entry flyering.
Yes, it takes a certain chutzpah.
It does. I don't like winding the venues up either.
No.
And I have been chucked out of a couple for trying to do it. And I mean, maybe that just makes me a coward, but I find it deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I would rather catch somebody's attention. And actually what's interesting is, now I had the slightly more descriptive time of this, and I know we're going a bit off the beaten track here, but I had a more descriptive time of this with my play, which I can't remember how much we discussed in the past about this, but it was a female monologue about the realities of being a lap dancer.
Yes.
And it was extremely heavily researched, factual piece. And I did an awful lot of research into this, which I don't mind saying is not as much fun as it sounded. It was a lot of hard work. But what I discovered is, particularly once we got a very lovely 5 stars from Broadway Baby, walking around the Royal Mile saying 5-star show about lap dancing is about the most polarising statement you can make. But what was so interesting was I could say that statement to somebody I was trying to flyer who was walking past me, and somebody 10 feet away would turn around and come back.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cocktail party effect, ears pricking up.
Exactly, and I think that there's something in that as well. I think you need to find, and this is perhaps to a certain extent where Out of the Lens failed, because it needed a little bit of description, whereas 5-star show about lap dancing says everything you need. I mean, it doesn't technically, because it almost sounds like you're going to get one, but it's got
the hook.
It's got the hook. Out of the Lens didn't have that so much, but it has that ability, because you have that hook, of making somebody a little distance away clock what's going on, which means you're not just flyering the people in front of you. You're flyering the people all around. And I think that can be quite helpful. But I do agree, going back to where we were, I do agree that entry and exit flyering is probably, at this point in the game, substantially more effective than standing on the Royal Mile with 800 other people all doing the same thing.
Did you spot a difference with the 5 stars once you got that, or was it because you were using that sentence, do you think? Did the 5 stars in its own right make any difference? Because the only reason I ask is because a totally different show, although one from the top 3, I was talking to the writer and the director. It was the show called Dreams of Peace and Freedom. Fantastic show, transcending score. As I say, like yours, one of the top 3 shows in Edinburgh this year.
Yeah, I sadly didn't see it.
But they had a proper interview. They were given a proper interview with one of the big newspapers. And I remember them saying that they were expecting a few more people to turn up the day afterwards. It made no difference whatsoever.
It's very difficult nowadays, I think. I think the 5 stars, we were lucky and got it comparatively early. We got it in the first Wednesday, I think. And we had a 25-seater venue, and we'd been getting 6s and 7s, and we had a 22 that day.
Oh, right.
And we had a 20. We had a 21 the next day, and then we had 6 again. So it had a very limited short-term effect. So I suspect what it was people who were free came that day, people who weren't booked for the next day, and then everyone forgot about it.
Or there were other 5-star shows.
Or there were other 5 stars. Yeah. Now
we must say that the star rating system is a slightly devalued currency. A 5-star show in Edinburgh isn't necessarily a show that will get 5 stars if it were in the West End.
No, absolutely. And indeed, there is a belief in Edinburgh that a 3-star review from The Scotsman is equivalent to a 5-star review from most of the small Edinburgh publications.
Oh, really?
So a 5-star review from The Scotsman holds weight.
Yeah.
And a lot of it.
But you're probably talking Edinburgh Festival rather than Edinburgh Festival Fringe, aren't you?
Predominantly. Now, they did actually publish, this year, I don't know whether they've done this previously, because I'd never had The Scotsman into one of my shows. They did come to Out of the Lens and gave us an exceptionally positive 3-star review. Which actually, and I mean, this proves how strict they are, it read, to all intents and purposes, like a 5-star one. It really was. Loved the show, had a great time, but with 3 stars. So they are very, very strict.
But they have to be. Let's talk about the newspaper is the national newspaper of Scotland.
It is.
It's like the Times.
It absolutely is. And what they did this year, and as I say, I don't know if they've done this before, but they put all of their major attention-grabbing ones, and we weren't one of these, unfortunately, onto a blog. Now, all of their reviews were done on the blog, but there was an additional page that had the list of top scorers in each rank, so there was even a couple of top 1 stars.
Oh, right, okay.
But they gave a demonstration there, and I didn't read down that properly, but I know for a fact there was no musical and opera above 4 stars, and there was only one of them. So every other musical on their important page, if you like, was a 3-star or below. Which is interesting and actually quite sad, I think. One of the things I noticed at this year's Edinburgh Fringe was how small the musical theatre section of the book was.
Oh, it always is.
13 pages. Yeah. In a book that's about 450 odd, I think. And it's, to be fair, that's not entirely representative, because they've changed the system recently. And when you sign up, you specify your principal category, which is the section of the book you go in, and 2 subcategories. So, for example, Out of the Lens was musicals and opera, and it then went down as new writing and LGBT.
Yeah.
A lot of people put because musical and opera is hidden under an other option. using air quotes there. And a lot of musicals went under theatre, with musical as a subcategory.
Well, can I tell you how this affects me as a punter? Because I do all my booking. Although I get the catalogue, I actually do all my research online on what shows I want to see,
right,
using the Ed Fringe sort of website. And I agree. They have done a significant rejig this last year. What I always do, however, is I go to the classification, as you say, musicals and opera, and I give that a thoroughly good squiz and pick the ones I want or might want or whatever listing I'm using. But then I always do a mop-up of drama first or theatre. Mm-hmm. And then actually most of the other things, because every now and then something, sometimes under comedy, a comedy musical might have found itself identified as a comedy rather than a musical.
Absolutely
so
true.
You actually, if you're interested in musical theatre, and I think most of our listeners probably will be.
One would hope so. You're in the wrong place if you're not, just telling you.
You come a long way in as well.
Yeah, quite.
The upshot is that don't just rely on the listings.
Absolutely.
Go to every genre, because you'll find something under exhibitions if you look carefully.
You probably will. And no, I think I fell foul of that this year, because all of my online time for at least a month before I got to Edinburgh was spent publicising. Yeah. Spent spamming Twitter, spent spamming Facebook, but I developed my website recently.
Yes.
And so as a result, I've mainly functioned off the printed programme, which meant I had 13 pages to go from, and really there's probably 17 or 18 in there if everything had gone under that category. And I came across a few by mistake, well, not by mistake, sorry. I came across a few by accident, just because...
In your travels?
I was either flyered for them or I suddenly spotted them in the book. But for example, I heard your interview the other day with the Victorian Vices teams, which, particularly given that Out of the Lens has been described as a prequel to Dorian Gray in style...
Yes, I can see that, actually, yes.
When I wrote my first outline, very, very well back in the day, I basically rewrote Dorian Gray. I have this extraordinary ability to write things that already exist that I have never read or listened to. But as soon as I wrote the sort of the synopsis, rather than... No, hang on, which one's the longer one? Oh goodness, I'm getting my terminology mixed up. No, the synopsis is the short one, the outline is the longer one. As soon as I moved up to the outline, it diverged away. Yes. But in style, it has been described as being a prequel to Dorian Gray.
Although we should say absolutely contemporary, whereas...
Oh, good heavens, yes. And in no way, because I haven't read Dorian Gray, so in no way based on it. But I was interested in going to see Vices because I thought I wasn't going to read or see Dorian Gray until Out of the Lens was done. And sadly, I didn't. I never knew it was a musical. I had absolutely no idea about that until I heard your episode on it. I was flyered for it and they didn't tell me it was a musical.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which, actually, there we go, starting to come full circle and go back to talking about Out of the Lens via advertising. There's an example of how not to do it. Make sure people know what your show is. Because if they had said musical to me, I'd have punched a hole in my diary. But I thought it was a play. And so I thought, well, if I have time, I'll go and see it. Yeah. And I didn't have time, and so I didn't see it. I managed to see, I think, something like 43 shows this year, which, bearing in mind I was producing too, I was quite chuffed with. But I was limited. And that, unfortunately, just fell off where it wouldn't have done. So, yes, now coming back to the full circle, we're talking about the advertising of Out of the Lens. I think the other thing that's difficult is myself and Nicholas Chave, my co-writer, are unknown quantities. And I think where shows have a real advantage with their advertising is when they can say, this is what people said about our show last year. And that's a big thing. Now, I put on the bottom of it the sellout 2011 laurel for Hitler the Musical, but that wasn't Kingsmill and Chave. You're not actually allowed to just leave just the laurel on because it's not the same company. What you have to do if you're doing that, and I spoke to the Fringe people about this, if you've done, so I was with TLMT then they were called, and I wasn't one of the principal members of it, even though I was the arranger MD, you have to put on, and I actually put on this, written by the arranger MD of 2011 sellout show Hitler the Musical. Which is no more than the truth. Which is no more than the truth, but it does detract from the power of just having a laurel on it. So I think if you have sold out, coming back up and just being able to go, this sold out last year, or this company sold out last year, or even just being able to quote, this was the 2013 Scotsman review. They said, and you get a good quote from somewhere. That makes so much difference. So make sure that whatever material you do have has the best thing on it to sell your show. And that could be a review, that could be the fact that you've got a famous or semi-famous name playing in it. Heavens above, I was told a story once of one spectacular failure with posters. Make sure your poster has your title on it. Because one year didn't. But make sure that what you have got is effective.
I've just got to tell you this story. It's an anecdotal story from a performer who's no longer alive, but he was a very big man by the name of Jason. And
I think I know where we're going.
I may have told you this story previously.
I think I've been told it's at the Fringe, if it's the one I think it is.
Oh, he was a comic, and bless him, I knew him slightly, and he wasn't a brilliant comic. Anyway, he did a show up in Edinburgh and got an excoriating review from The Guardian.
Mm-hmm.
And the star review is 1 to 5. You can't give 0.
No.
So the lowest star rating you can get is a 1. And so they gave their review and gave him 1 star. So he then put in quotations a star, The Guardian,
yes,
about him rather than about the show. And if nothing else, that's I'm going to use the word again, but that's good chutzpah.
It is, and it's not libel because it's true.
It is.
It was a fact. Yeah, Barry Church-Woods, who is one of the performers, participants team at the Edinburgh Fringe, loves that story.
Yes.
And if you go to one of his one-man show developmental things that they do at Fringe Central sometimes, that often comes up. And I think it's a brilliant... And finding your little hook.
Yeah.
There was a wonderful one, which I can't remember what the actual words were, but the review was something, or the quote was something like, "the most amazing show on the planet." And every word had quote marks around it, and underneath he had 8 different publications listed.
So he'd made a sentence.
And I just thought, it's actually it was a comedy show, of course,
yeah.
And it was one of the big ones that can afford this, these big, massive A0 posters. But that's clever. And if you can do something like that and get away with it, then you've got somewhere to run.
So let's talk about out of the lens in terms of your audience responses. Because the day I went, I think there were about 20, 30 people in the auditorium.
I can't remember which show you were at. It wouldn't have been that many. Our largest audience was 28.
All right, but it certainly didn't feel empty. It certainly felt a good size, and there was a very strong sense of appreciation in the audience afterwards. I think it was one of those shows that it unfolded itself nicely like a sort of Fabergé egg and revealed its all treasures. Slowly, you made an absolutely right choice to have professional actors.
Yes.
They brought a lot to the stage.
Yes.
They brought a lot to the performances. And the story you'd written worked perfectly, and you'd cast very well. So it was beautifully done. I was delighted by it, and I certainly got the sense of an audience that was delighted by it. But what sort of feedback were you getting at the time?
We have had almost zero negative reception to it.
Good.
We had one very peculiar review, which I won't go into details of, but it was very positive for the most part, but made very little sense. Their one big negative point, which was essentially what it said was, loved every aspect of it, but it shouldn't have been a musical.
Righto.
Wondered why this person chose to come to a musical and review it. But there we go. Apart from that, now obviously a lot of the time, if people realise you're part of the show, they won't condemn it within earshot. Yes. But I did not hear anyone condemn the show.
I don't think people would have necessarily realised you were part of the show in a strange way.
Quite possibly not.
You sat in the audience like a punter.
I did. I think possibly the only thing would given it away usually to the first people to come in was the fact that as a general rule I started in the auditorium. I didn't come in. A couple of nights I did if there was somebody I knew who was outside. But I think perhaps yes they didn't, unless they matched me up with my headshot. And to be fair, I look a little bit different now because I put on a little bit of weight, so it doesn't look quite so much like me. Then maybe they didn't realise. And sometimes that's a nice thing because it means you can hear people say things they might not say if they did think you were there. But I mean, as a general rule, we got a fantastic and very positive reception, and that counts. We were talking earlier about moving into September. That counts for the run that we had at Waterloo East last week as well. Just over 200 people have seen the show in total, and I haven't yet heard a negative word about it, which is very, very, flattering and encouraging, and we're absolutely delighted. And it's Nick and I's first run out of the gates writing a musical. It's actually Nick's first time writing.
Really?
He's dabbled with songs before. We've got about 8 projects, quote unquote, on the go. By which I mean we've giggled and written something and then put it away. But we've never actually. I mean, I've written cabarets and things like that, and I did Hitler, but I've never written a book musical from scratch. So, to get the kind of response that we've had was extremely encouraging.
Well, can I say that I think your working relationship with him, he was the chap on the keyboard, wasn't he?
He was, yes.
With the interesting hair. He looked a little bit like a badger. I think that's the best thing I can say.
He was compared once during the Fringe to Badger from Wind in the Willows. And for those who are wondering, he has very sort of voluminous
It's
black.
Pink. Yeah, it's a bouffant hair.
It is bouffant hair, black hair with a massive white stripe down the middle of it. Yes, he has been compared to Badger in the past, unfortunately.
But your working relationship, at least in terms of the output, is clearly very simpatico. And you asked me a question in the preview episode, and I'm now going to answer it on the record, which is, could I tell the difference between the songs you'd written, the songs and the songs he'd written? You know, where was the join? I could not see the join.
Excellent.
So I think in the sense of finding someone who, at least from a punter's point of view, that you appear to work with very effectively, I think that bodes well for the future as well. I mean, that feels like an effective working relationship.
Yeah, I've had a whale of a time working with him. I mean, he's been a friend of mine now for almost 5 years. We met at Trinity when I was training.
So he's a close shave, is he?
Oh, badum tish. Oh dear, oh God, I can see the jokes when we do Sweeney Todd. Yes, let's not go there. Yeah, I mean, I've known him for almost 5 years now. We've always got on well, and it was an absolute pleasure. We had a couple of moments where we butted heads on ideas.
Yeah, but that's a creative dynamism.
Of course,
yeah.
And I think if we didn't butt heads, it would mean we weren't approaching things from a wide enough angle.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of things in there where a song came out completely different to what I imagined. The biggest one being The Perfect Muse, which listeners will have heard when we played the demo back in July. That, in my head, was quite GNS-y when I wrote it, and kind of this very lyrical, flowery piece of music. And it's actually ended up, rather than being melody-based, it's actually ended up being a lot more rhythmic, which works perfectly, and it gives it this great drive that I'd never imagined. And I think that's what really works. I think my other problem is that what I write best is ballads, and you can't write a musical theatre piece that's entirely balladic. So I mean, where I wrote, for example, the title song, if you have everything that sounds like the title song, it's going to be a very dull show. And whereas Nick has more variety than I do. He approaches it, as we discussed before, slightly more technically than I do, because he has a slightly more technical background.
But you bring different things to the table, and end up with a sumptuous feast. Yeah,
well, hopefully so. I'm glad you think that. I mean, I actually wrote bits of one of the songs I wrote before I came back from Canada. I had about 7 lyrics written, I think, before I came back, and 1 song. And I then wrote Out of the Lens, which was the point where I then realised, hang on a minute, I've run out of time here. I'm not going to get this finished if I'm writing a musical and a play all at the same time, and that's where I brought Nick in. And I think that was the great thing, was I kind of had this, here's a couple of nice, quiet, pretty songs, and then he took it and ran somewhere completely different. And what's nice is out of that was the third song I wrote, which is Just Another Man. This bluesy thing came out of the direction the musical had taken. I don't think I would have written it that way had I not had that.
So it was building on,
And, there's a couple of points where I gave Nick an idea and he ran with it. And so I think we feed off each other a lot, which is a really enjoyable way to work. We have written work when we're in 2 different places, but actually I've spent quite a lot of time during the writing period just camping out at his house. And because he's got 2 keyboards, fortunately, because he's got one, a travelling one and a home one, and it means that we can sit at each one and then just go, hang on a minute, mate, I've got an idea, listen to this, and just bounce off each other, and it's so much fun working that way.
But the show, Out of the Lens, has had 2 babies.
It has.
Let us discuss them. The first was a live baby, and the second is a recorded baby.
Indeed.
Let's talk about the live baby first.
Yes.
Because, as we said a couple of weeks ago here on Musical Talk, there was a chance to see it in September in London. So its national tour is doing tremendously well.
Indeed.
So what made you decide to bring it down to London, and how was that received?
It was a desire to keep the ball rolling. And the opportunity. We were very lucky. The manager of the Waterloo East Theatre came to see the Hippodrome preview and really enjoyed the show. And between him and my director, who also works at the Waterloo East a lot, she's one of the associate directors there, or the associate director, I'm not sure if there's more than one, that relationship there fed into the opportunity. And Nick and I just held our hands up immediately, went, yeah, we'll take that.
Yeah.
And there was a double reason for that. One was, a couple of days after the offer, we realised it would be a nice opportunity to launch the recorded baby. And the other one was, it's a London transfer. And that reads well on anything. It reads well on our CVs. It reads well for the show. It's great for the actors because it means they get a little bit more exposure, which is never a bad thing. And it was just... The worst thing about Edinburgh is stopping.
Yes.
And we were talking about this just before we went live on this recording, is the fact that I'm definitely a little bit down at the moment, and part of that is the fact that it's all finally stopped.
Yes.
But it's not as bad because it's come down slower.
Yeah.
Because of these babies. But Waterloo East, it went very well. The biggest problem I had was that I blew my budget in Edinburgh, which meant I couldn't pay for advertising in London, which is why I had, people like the Musical Theatre Network and a couple of composer duos that I'm friendly with on Twitter retweeting us and spamming Facebook every opportunity I got, and that was my advertising. And it was that, therefore, made it very hard to sell the show, unfortunately. But we got just over 60 people across the 3 performances that we did there, which for last minute, it only went live on the website, I think, 2 weeks before the performances. So it was all very, very last minute. And actually, I was really pleased with that. And yet again, we had fantastic responses from pretty much everybody. We've got one review I'm waiting on. Might have come out today, for all I know. We had a reviewer in from Broadway World, and I haven't seen that yet. But I believe that's going to be very positive. It was just a nice opportunity to pick the ball up again. We had such a great time getting together. We had a tech run the day before, and we actually didn't quite finish the tech run that day. We had to finish it just before the first performance, because it was just so much fun getting back together that the giggles were back again. And that's a great place for any performance to be, I think, because everybody got on really well. It was a fantastic opportunity, and I'm glad we had it. I'm glad we did it. It would have been nice to have more audience in,
of course, but
as an unknown quantity with no advertising budget, I think we did rather well.
What it shows, however, is that given those circumstances and the fact that you've got 60 people in over a very limited run, that actually it's a good show and it can be picked up. So other people may be interested in it.
Well, fingers crossed. Really, at this point in time, my next goal is to have it picked up and to have somebody. Well, we have had the Dublin Gay Theatre Festival want it, but I need to find a way of financing that. And so what I'm hoping to do is that's in May. And if we work out that we can do that, what I'd like to do is then arrange a small tour in England as well. Ideally under a producer who's funding the thing or finding sponsorship for the thing, if not with the help of one of the arts funding bodies. But we'll see. We'll see.
Crowdfunding, perhaps, because
this is an idea.
I'm aware of several Edinburgh shows that crowdfunded to get to Edinburgh. Alba being one. I'm also aware of several shows which have crowdfunded since in order to come to London.
Yes, it's definitely a viable method. What I don't know, and what I'd be interested to know, and I don't know if this is something you've discussed with anybody, is how much that crowdfunding starts on the basis of having a group of friends or family or something who jumpstart it.
That I don't know. Because
this seems to be like what I've heard from people, because I do a variety of different things, and one of the things I do in my spare time, is I'm a big board gamer.
Oh, I see.
And I'm actually developing a board game at the moment, which is going very, very slowly, but I looked into the possibility of kickstarting that to make it a bit of a bigger thing for me to do, and the general consensus was it's going to be your mates that do it, unless you're a known quantity. So I don't know how true that is in the theatre world. But
it doesn't cost you anything to try, so it's worth thinking about. The other thing I'd say about the Dublin the Drama Festival is that the Happy Prince went there a few years ago.
Oh, did it really?
Yes. The revival that went to Edinburgh a couple of years ago and then returned to Edinburgh this year.
Yes.
Went to the Dublin Gay Festival because of Oscar Wilde. That's the connection. It's not a gay
of course,
story,
yes.
But Oscar Wilde is a Dublin chap and famously a gay man, if you have kept up with those headlines. It's fairly old news now, in fairness. And was absolutely adored there because it's and has got fantastic reviews. So it's a place that's well worth going to.
Yeah.
If you get the chance, both as a member of the public to see the shows, but also to get a show on there. So it's an opportunity that might be worth pursuing if you can.
And I'd love to do it. It's just the practicalities of the thing. So we'll see where it goes. But the nice thing is there has been interest.
And the thing that struck me, I thought that was very interesting, was when I was watching the show. Although it is undeniably visual, there are elements about it which are very visual. I also realised at the same time, in a kind of sort of parallel commentary going on in my head, but it was an almost perfect radio musical in the sense that you could, with minimal tweaking, remove anything that was visually reliant and in no heavy-handed way pick that up in a way that would allow an audio-only version to work very, very successfully. And so I remember you and I had a brief conversation about this in Edinburgh after I'd seen the show, and you said with a big grin on your face, but we are recording it. And that too has happened.
It has, although not quite in a radio play fashion, in the sense that we haven't recorded all of the dialogue.
But some dialogue.
Yes, there is the original Edinburgh cast recording, which was released yesterday as we are talking, which was Monday the 22nd of September. It was released digitally a little bit before that, so it is now available on iTunes, on Spotify and on Amazon Music if you want a digital copy. If you want a hard copy CD, Dress Circle is very kindly carrying it, and you can order it from them, or you can actually order it directly from my website, which for anybody who hasn't heard it before is www.dragonliterature.com. The CD is £10. The digital download is $7.99. At the moment, I am not selling the CD from my website abroad, although that might have changed by the time this is broadcast, simply because I need to work out the logistics of doing that, and I haven't got around to doing that yet.
So people should write you if they're interested, though?
Absolutely. No, by all means, and there's a contact form on my website, so if you are abroad and you want a copy and you want to order it from me rather than Dress Circle, just use the contact form and get in touch.
And we should say that the two songs that we played previously in the past on Musical Talk from the score are dummy recordings.
They were demos that we put together to promote the show before it went up to Edinburgh. They are not the versions that are going to be recorded on this CD, or that have been recorded on this CD. This is entirely the cast that went up to Edinburgh. And yes, so I mean, it's a lovely recording. I was absolutely delighted. I found this lovely little studio up in Camden called Alice's Loft, which looks just as cute as it sounds. It feels like you're recording in someone's living room, but it's actually in an industrial unit. It's very well disguised, but absolutely fantastic time there.
Curious and curious, said Alice.
Right, which yes, that was, believe it or not, what they based the concept on.
I thought it might be.
Mass colossal mirror in it,
really?
which if you buy the hard copy CD, you will see in the photograph inside it. I'm really proud of this recording. It is a limited edition. We've only printed 200 copies, and once that has sold out of actual CDs, that's it. The digital version will stay live, of course, for at least the foreseeable future. But yeah, that is available now, and we would love people to buy it and hear it. A couple of short, half-minute demos will be going up on the website in the near future, but obviously Amazon and iTunes, you can already preview little clips and tracks.
So people can, at this moment, this very day, having listened to this episode, go off and get a copy of Out of a Lens, either in their hot little hands or in their hot little ears via digital download.
Absolutely true.
Fantastic.
And we would love people to.
And presumably also to feedback to you as well.
Yes, and if you do hear, the website again is in the CD sleeve. I don't think it's probably linked actually on the digital download, which was possibly a faux pas on my part. But we would absolutely love to hear any thoughts that you have. One of the things we had a lovely bit of feedback in, there's actually a bonus track. So you've got the 12 pieces of music, which include, there's 9 principal songs, one of which is broken up into 2 parts, and there's the bows music, and there's a short reprise. We've then got 5 short dialogue tracks, just to sort of fill in a little of the plot for people who haven't seen it. And we then have the bonus track, which is the penultimate song of the show, Not Where I Started, which in the show is a full verse and then a coda with a phone call in the middle, and that version is recorded. But we then have the full version of the song, which was the original demo that we ran, which unfortunately we decided just didn't quite work in the final show, and so it was cut down. But that's 3 full verses and the coda. And one of the things that we've had is lots of people coming and saying, I've just seen that's on your CD, I'm looking forward to hearing that, from people who've wanted to hear more of that song, which is very encouraging. Nice. And I actually love the song, it just didn't fit in the show. So I'm glad that we actually added that on there. But we've had a lot of feedback so far from people looking forward to the CD. But we look forward to hearing from people who have heard it, which would be delightful.
Well, as I said at the time, I saw this show and I genuinely gave it 5 stars. I just thought it was a cracking show. And now that the dust has settled on Edinburgh, I concluded that it was one of the 3 best shows, certainly one of the 3 best bits of new writing that I saw in Edinburgh. It's a great show, it deserves more, and I hope it gets it. So
thank you. Well, fingers crossed.
If you want to just lean up against a tree, I think I'm about ready to get going. A subtle touch of blurring in the foreground, the subject just a little to the right. A pause for a moment till the wind moves just so, and a slightly higher angle for the light. Now turn right towards me so you're facing this way. Smile, come on, it isn't so hard. A modicum of focus and a sense of fun, and you won't appear to be so on your guard.
The arm like this.
Yes, that looks great.
The head just so.
No, a bit less straight.
And a shot of confidence and a touch of style.
Exactly. Now put your hand behind your head.
You mean like this?
Try relax instead.
I can get this, just give me a while.
A languid pose of comfort and contentment. That's the mark of a picture in the park. A beam of light that shines between the treetops and captures gentle shadows on the face. The atmosphere of gaiety gives me more ideas, and it helps the two of us to set the pace. Hey, now there's a good one, it's just a bit suggestive. I'm not sure why I like it, but I do. Keep it up, but slowly, this must stay PG, for then my tutors will see something new.
This is quite the distraction. He's just an innocent child. His unique attraction arouses and ignites me.
This is something different,
Quite delicious.
quite refreshing,
Something that could challenge me.
I have to try, though it does feel strange.
Now the fun begins past that first exchange. He's lost his cautious immunity. The window is now open. I can make my mark with his picture in the park.
But amazingly, you put on 2 shows, you were acting as producer, you were involved in the advertising as far as you could be, etc., etc., and yet you still found time to see some other shows.
I did.
They weren't all musicals, in fact.
No, they
because man
predominantly
cannot,
not.
No, man cannot live by bread alone, but...
Even when your name is Kingsmill.
Very good, yes.
Here all week.
But there's a good reason for that. But you did see some other musicals.
I did.
So it's probably worthwhile. Which ones have stood out for you, either because they were remarkable or better than you expected, or had moments of excellence but could have been better? And was there a theme? Because I know before we started recording, you were saying, and I agree with you, that there were a number of shows up here that had potential which hadn't quite been achieved. That a lot of shows were 1 or 2 drafts short of a final version.
Absolutely. And actually, funnily enough, I think that's not entirely an Edinburgh thing.
No, it's not.
I think there are a couple of shows in London. For my part, I actually thought, just to give an example, I thought the same of From Here to Eternity. I actually thought with a couple more weeks' worth of workshopping, it would have been a really good show. As it was a good show. And it fell a little flat. But that just for the purposes of anybody who's unsure precisely what I'm saying, that's what I'm talking about, is that level. Just feeling like the quality hadn't quite been found in some way. But anyway, that's a London show, that's not an Edinburgh show. Yeah. So, of course, we're talking about Edinburgh here. So, well, I suppose the easiest thing from a perspective of making sure I don't miss anything is just to charge through in order.
Yes.
And actually the first show I'm going to mention absolutely does not do what we were just talking about, and that was the 2014 edition of the News Review.
Which I also saw.
Yes.
And our good friend Michael Riley was musical director.
Yes, and sadly a slightly abortive interview, which is a shame because he's a great speaker and I think that would have been a good fun.
I met him and the director. Both of them had a lot to say, and it was a good interview, and I'm just sorry, but it was, unfortunately, corrupted electronically, as these things occasionally do. But what I admired, because it's not musical theatre, but it involved a lot of music and musical theatre within
and quite a bit of singing.
Indeed, but it's a big job for a musical director because
huge.
Because there's a lot where there's singing, as you say, but also Michael had to do the payoffs. The intros to each sketch, and it's a quick fire show, so things come in and things go out. And he did a lot of glissando, I suppose. Is that the word where you run your thumb down the keyboard? It's a kind of da 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 da. Instead of that, it was a kind of here's the end of sketch, straight into the next one. And rather splendidly, and he put a lot of thought into this. He would play musical links that connected to whatever the sketch was about. And I found myself quite often thinking, I know this. Oh, it's that song. So there'll be a sketch about an aeroplane for whatever reason, and you suddenly realise you were getting 2 or 3 bars of "Come Fly With Me" from the Frank Sinatra album.
Absolutely. Or there were a couple of sort of national anthem or
Yes.
sort of patriotic songs and things like that snuck in. Yeah, it was extremely cleverly done. And it's hard. The MD's job in that is quite hard. They cycle their MDs.
Every 6 weeks, isn't it?
Exactly, yes. So
they can rest their thumb in a bucket of warm water for a couple of days.
I think that's probably it. But it's a big thing with them is that they always have somebody fresh doing it. And they're constantly rewriting material for that show because otherwise it's not contemporary.
It's been running since 1978 or something. So
yes, it's a very long time anyway. And yet it's still just as successful as it ever was, just as brilliant as it ever was, I think.
Well, this year I thought was particularly good because I don't see it every year, but I've seen it on and off over the last few years, both in London, where it has a sort of residency, and then in Edinburgh when it goes up. And I actually thought this year's was sharper than it had been for a while, but then again we've had a horrible year news-wise. So
well,
there's been a lot to talk about.
And there were a lot of very good one-liners in this one, and I thought, to be fair, some of it, as I suppose all political comedy does, potentially cuts a little close to the bone.
Yes, it does.
But the way that it's presented, it's actually a harmless show.
Yeah.
It's a risque show, but it's a very harmless one. And I think that because they cover so much ground, they don't harp a point long enough for it to become dry or offensive.
Well, it's like everything else. If you don't like one thing, there'll be something else along in a minute. I would just say...
Or in less than a minute.
Well, I was talking to Michael about because it struck me as being quite a heavy musical play for him. And as I said, and as you do a sort of glissando at the end of most sketches, how's your hands bearing up? And you can't see this on the radio, but he held up his little hands, and he had blisters and blood and cuts, and he said he'd taken to using his knuckles rather than his thumb for this, that and the other. And the director who was with us hadn't picked up any of this, because obviously that's not the kind of thing he was thinking about.
No.
But he hadn't realised about the physical wear and tear on a pianist's hands in a particularly heavy musical show.
Yeah, and of course I suppose the blessing in some ways was that he's playing an upright piano.
Yes.
He's not playing an electronic one.
So you can't see him bleed.
Well, no, but take my word for it, glissandoing on a keyboard or on an electronic piano, as a rule, in my experience, is substantially more painful.
Is it?
At least if it has a decent action.
Yeah.
If it's one of these ones with floppy keys, it doesn't feel like anything. But I don't know, maybe that's just me, but I've always found it to be much more unpleasant than doing it on a real piano. So that's a small saving grace, but only a very small one, because doing it as much as he was doing it in that, I was wondering the same thing. I must admit, I didn't think to ask him when I saw him, but it's a hard show on the MD. It really is. And there's the news review. The next one I saw was my typical slight sojourn to the Oriental, which every year I go up, I seem to go to see a Chinese opera. And there was one called Fleeting Clouds, The Splendid Library, which I think... Now, I'm wondering if something happened here, because I was expecting I think it was a 2.5-hour show, or a 2-hour show that it was advertised as. And in actual fact, what it was a 1.25-hour concert performance.
Oh, right.
Which was sort of semi-staged, or at least it felt semi-staged. I'm wondering if somebody fell ill and they had to quickly rejig the performance, because it certainly wasn't what I was going in for. It was a lovely piece, and I really, really enjoyed it, but I felt that the production just fell short, and I think that might be why. But I really encourage people to go to these. It was terribly poorly attended, which I thought was a great shame. Maybe... This is in the EICC, which is a big hall,
yes.
And there were maybe 50 people in it. And I do feel that it's a shame they don't draw more attention. Now, part of that may be because, so this year, for example, it happened on, this one anyway, was the 31st, the 1st and the 2nd, which is the Thursday, Friday, Saturday before it all kicks off.
It's been quite early in the process, isn't it?
And it tends to be then, and these big touring companies tend to do 3 shows, or 4 shows, and then vanish. Do keep an eye out for them, because they are worth a look.
We've said this before in Musical Talk, but one of the joys of Edinburgh is that you can afford to take a punt on something that you know nothing about.
Oh, goodness.
Just to see what it's like. I saw, as I say, a few years ago, a very excellent version of Purcell's Julius Caesar opera in German.
Yeah.
And I don't speak German, not since O-level. But it still was able to be funny, and it could use video and limited amounts of English narration, but it was just a masterful and re-rhythmed it. And
Did they surtitle it in any way, or give you a translation?
There were periodic video inserts which told you what you were going to see, or would you just see, but it was very comically done.
That's actually how the Chinese operas tend to do it as well. Now, actually, the first time I went to see one of these, it was surtitled. But the second and third ones that I've seen, they've had a monitor and they've projected in very much silent film fashion.
Yeah.
They've projected an overview of what's happening with a little bit of potential speech.
Yeah.
Although mostly...
Intertitles is the film usage word. So.
Oh, is it? Right,
Yeah.
okay, I didn't know that. Okay, there you go, learn something new. But yeah, do look out for these, because they're worth... I mean, they cost more, and this was £25 to go and see this, which for Edinburgh is the higher end of most
Yes, it
tickets.
is. But on the other hand, if it was in London, you wouldn't balk at paying £25.
Heavens no.
It'd be
And
£100,
quite
£150.
frankly, perhaps not for the reduced version that I ended up seeing, but for one of the full productions. So Ching Cheng, I believe is the pronunciation, Qingcheng, which I saw in 2011, was worth 50 easily, and I think I paid 20 for that. So they're well worth going to have a look at. And it's great. It's a great way of discovering something new cultural-wise.
Quite.
And Ching Cheng actually sold a CD, so I have the recording for that, and I love listening to it now and then. It's a great piece. But anyway, that's just a sort of semi-aside, because while it was more operatic, it's still within the vein. I'm going to come back to what I saw next. So I will leave that one off the list just momentarily because I want to talk... Well, I have talked about it and I'm going to talk about it again briefly. So the next one up was Riptide, the slasher musical.
Which I didn't get to see, but I did get to speak to one of the stars and I think the composer.
Now, this was one of these examples where the potential wasn't quite in the room. And I suspect it was probably, I don't know, budgetary constraint or whatever. No offence to anybody who was there, because they all put their all into it. But I feel like this is one of those things where if they'd been able to pitch out on a professional cast, they would have really hit a good show. It was a really good, fun piece of fluff. And it was, if you wanted to go along and you liked slasher movies and you wanted a wonderful parody of a slasher movie, which I don't particularly enjoy, I watch occasionally, you got that. What you didn't get yet was a really good musical. But there is one in it, I think. And I think, the composer and the lyricist, there's some great work in there. There really is some fantastic work in there.
So what are the things they need to do to bring it up? It's not just the professionalism of the cast then?
No. Well, I think what it needs... This is going to sound a lot more offensive than it really is, and I don't mean it to be. It felt like a gimmick, not a show.
Oh, that's a perfectly good observation.
And I think it needed to be a musical. It depends on what they're trying to be. If they're trying to be a gimmick, then they've succeeded. But they are going to appeal to a lower denominator than they could do.
Yeah.
Now, and that may be their choice. And if so, perfect, they've done it. To somebody like myself who went in and, I felt the story was a bit thin, I felt there was a bit too much focus on the gags, and the fact that there was good music and lyrics there was almost slightly overlooked by the production. And I think if they pulled all that up, they'd then have an excellent musical. And I think it's their balance of where they want to find themselves on that grid. And so they may have succeeded, I don't know.
So it was a comedy with music rather than a musical comedy?
Yes, absolutely. And it has the potential to be either. If it's a comedy with music, and that's what they want, I'm quite happy not to see it again. But, for somebody who's looking for that kind of thing, for sure. If they want to be a musical comedy, they've got a little bit of work left to do. But, they came in for some fantastic critical reception. Audiences loved it. They were selling out left, right and centre because they were a gimmick. And, actually that comes back to one of the things that advertising I meant to say, and I was actually going to use them as an example, so I'll say it now, is if you've got a gimmick, advertising is substantially simpler.
It is indeed, yes.
So, they had... I think it was about 3 of their cast members who they cycled through so that they didn't all die of pneumonia and paralysis. But they would have one member of their cast coated in blood lying on the mile.
Wearing nothing but bathing shorts.
Yes, or bikinis in the case of the girls.
I saw that, yes.
And, it works because it attracts attention.
It's funny you should say that because, and that's true for any quality of show. Dougal Irvin's Departure Lounge has been up in various iterations and by different companies in Edinburgh over the last few years, and I think it was 2 years ago there was a version that Dougal himself wasn't involved in, but they'd cast wisely in the sense that the 4 lads were all pretty much stunning.
That would have been the one I saw, because I saw it 2 years ago.
The way they used to advertise it. Oh, yes, we went to see it
together,
in fact.
We did.
We saw it in the basement of St Augustine's.
And they were handing out condoms.
They were indeed, but they were advertising quite a lot in the street, very simply, by sunbathing on towels, 4 chaps wearing nothing but shorts.
I remember that.
And of course, it does draw a crowd. It certainly draws a female crowd, but it draws a male crowd as well. Because it's, I have to say, it's a tried and tested student thing, but nudity or flesh will sell shows.
Absolutely.
And even though the show doesn't actually involve any toplessness.
No, indeed. I think it was a very good tactic. And they were also handing out the condoms, which I think is a great little gag. Sex Ed, the musical, which was up the same year, did the same thing.
You say when it was up. I think that's something.
Yes, quite. Hello, Freud.
Yes, come again?
God. But I think Departure Lounge got one up on them because they actually had the packets printed with all of their details. Sex Ed just stuck their stickers on them, which was also a perfectly viable tactic. And to be fair, having custom printed condom packets probably cost them a fortune for publicity, but it worked.
But it takes us back to the point you're making, that if you've got a gimmick or something, you're going to be...
Yes. Yeah. And that's where I fall flat, is I don't tend to write shows. I'm a bit too serious for that. I don't tend to write shows with a mile gimmick.
Yeah.
It might be a gimmick of some kind, but it's not suitable for Royal Mile publicity.
Or an enormous costume.
Or an enormous costume.
The shows where they are doing sort of period pieces win instant interest on the Mile, because when everyone turns... Armada a few years ago, Rob Winlow very sensibly had them running up and down, well, not running up and down, but, tromping up and down the Royal Mile in their Tudor costumes with Queen Elizabeth I. It was stunning. She was just the perfect replica.
That was a beautiful production.
But that immediately draws attention, and it's the same with KD Productions and their Anything Goes and their 52nd Street a few years ago. They send them up in the costume.
Yeah,
and of course, if you're wearing a 1920s flapper dress and a feather boa, people are going to spot you.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're dressed in army fatigues or whatever it is you're doing for Macbeth or whatever,
Well, this is it, and
it's not so interesting.
This is the problem I had again. Is my costumes for the musical were perfectly bland, everyday wear.
Contemporary. Well, it's a contemporary musical, and the chaps don't wear anything unusual.
Exactly. And in the case of my play, if I'd sent her out in her costume, she'd have got pneumonia.
Yes,
which I wasn't too keen on. But anyway, yes. Coming back to
play in a very different way.
Quite. Coming back to Riptide, it was they succeeded very well on that front, and also they had the very catchy T-shirts, of course, which is a great thing if you can pull it off. Again, perhaps more suitable for something like that. I think a T-shirt with Out of the Lens on it doesn't attract quite so much attention as something that has Riptide, the slasher musical. And actually, I think yellow was very clever. Yellow is a colour that not that many people used. And this is a weird thing. Colour is important at the Fringe, because if your poster is generally dark... And I think I got around this with the Out of the Lens posters, because all of the features on them were white. If your poster's generally dark, it sinks into all the others, because that's the trend. If you can find a way... So there was the sushi... Oh goodness, what were they called? The Japanese sushi tap dancers or something like that, whose posters were violently pink. And you couldn't miss them because nobody else was.
Also, it must be said, now, as much as I love Edinburgh, it is a very grey city. It's made of granite.
Yeah.
It's stone. This summer was, I think, one of the coldest, wettest Edinburghs for many, many
years. It was freezing.
So it was grey weather as well.
Yes.
So, and you're quite right, there is something about grey that absorbs the colour of other things. So if you've got something a bit shocking colour-wise, it really does. I don't remember, funnily enough, you have these sort of tone poems in your head. This year, I don't remember Edinburgh as being a colourful event. It was probably no less or more than ever before, but just in my head, it's much greyer.
I'm inclined to agree with that, because I saw a lot of colour, but it was always the same people.
Yeah.
Like there was a group of Thai... I think they were doing drummer dancing or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but they were yellow. Yeah. Riptide were yellow. The sushi people were pink. That stood... And actually, to be fair, even the How to Succeed guys, because they mimicked the Broadway poster.
Well, they were wearing all their smart Mad Men costumes, weren't they?
Well, it was the same thing. It was the circle with him in it, wasn't it? But it was then that sort of cyan turquoise blue, which now I personally have my issues about copying Broadway posters. I understand entirely why they did it, because it stands out. I don't like that tactic myself, but it was that bright blue that stood out.
Yes, Simon Lynch, who was the actor, playing J. Pip on Fringe in the poster, as he said in the interview with him, his physog was everywhere.
Yes.
Wearing this smart... It was actually it was a blue tie.
Yes.
Over a blue background, and he was wearing a grey suit, I think. But,
correct. But it's eye-catching. So anyway, moving on, Riptide and How to Succeed both did very well. And actually Anything Goes was quite standoutish, although the darker blue was a little bit less so than the How to Succeed blue.
It's a naval blue, isn't it?
But I think that's the thing, is if you can do colour, do colour. I then had a very, very extraordinary thing happen to me in the Fringe, so I went an entire week without seeing a musical. So the next one up was Snakes, which you, of course, know extremely well. Listeners have heard about before. I had not seen, and I finally got a chance to go and see it, and it deserves every bit of credit that you've given it. It's such a brilliant show. Absolutely bonkers, inane humour. And yet,
beautifully put, it is bonkers.
It's completely bonkers, but it's absolutely superb. Yes, to anyone who's wondering, it has the iconic line from the film, which I will not repeat for explicitity reasons, if that's a word. But it's just brilliantly done, and I think it's an extremely charismatic piece. Possibly one of the most charismatic pieces I saw at the Fringe.
Is that because of the performers?
Yes. I mean, it's partly the piece. It's partly the fact that they've chosen a lot of upbeat music to actually go with it. There's
it's very
that kind
vivacious, isn't it?
It's very vivacious. They've got that pop disco type feel to it, which does enhance that. But the three of them just blew me away. The performances in that were stunning. I noticed they're kickstarting a London transfer themselves. So talking, as we were earlier, about kickstarting, they're one of the ones that's doing it. And I sincerely hope they get it. But Londoners, keep your eyes out. And when Snakes the Musical comes on, for heaven's sake, go and see it. I won't harp on, because I mean,
because I have.
Yes, exactly. But it's thoroughly deserving of it. And I thought that was a fantastic show.
I'm so pleased that you agree, though, because it's nice to have it's nice to have one's opinion backed up by a competent authority, as they say in the Mikado.
You are no less competent than I am. In fact, probably more so. But anyway, yeah. So that was very, very good. This doesn't really qualify per se, but I saw the Sweet release, which Sweet Venues does. I didn't get involved with this year, it was a mistake, I think. But they do this year. I think they did it 4 nights a week. They do a cabaret from 11 till 1.
Of songs from their shows, by any chance?
No, just stuff.
Oh, right.
They do stand-up comedians. They do sometimes they theme things. I think it's a complete. I've only attended a couple of them, and one of them this year was sidelined completely and became a showing of the first episode of the new Doctor Who, which was a spectacular way to spend an evening.
Yeah, I imagine.
And that was the Saturday, the penultimate Saturday, the penultimate day of the festival.
It would have been the 23rd of August.
Correct. There's a man who knows his dates for Doctor Who. But anyway, yes, and they did a burlesque night, which is what I'm actually referencing. Now, I'm aware that's not quite musical, but I think it deserves a mention because there were some fantastic acts there. And actually, I think the Sweet release is as much as anything what I'm plugging here, because I think that's a worthwhile show to look for. Granted, for performers, unless you've got an evening show, like if you've got a 10 o'clock in the morning show, for heaven's sake, don't do it, because you don't get out till 1 o'clock.
You'll be tired.
It will be, yes. I think it's probably not wise for that. But if you're an audience member or if you're a performer with an evening show so you can lie in, I recommend it because and I recommend getting involved as well, because you get people from all over the Fringe. You can showcase your work to other people. And it was a very good evening.
These things are always to be encouraged if at all possible. It was, I think I said a few years ago, I went along completely on spec to the midnight cabaret of songs and extracts of shows from what was on the range of the sea venues in the...
I remember you mentioning that.
And what came out of that was, quite by chance, I came across the 2 or 3 songs from Sue Casson and The Happy Prince. And although I hadn't seen the show and wasn't going to be able to see the show in Edinburgh that year, I was so entranced by these songs that I then went off to find the show, and I've had a delightful relationship with that show, and indeed the other things that Sue Casson's been responsible for ever since, and that's purely by going at midnight to a show on spec to see what it was like. I thought, there's no harm in having a go, and it wasn't. The great thing, as I said it before, and I can never overstress this, in Edinburgh you have license to try everything and do everything. It's cheap. This was free, the cabaret I saw. And you may discover, like you said, something that you didn't know you liked.
Well, this is one of the things. I mean, this is one of the reasons I have seen so few musicals. Is I try and only either go and see shows I absolutely adore. So I would quite happily see a Sweeney Todd or a Drowsy Chaperone, as long as I thought the group was going to do justice, or something new. Otherwise, I see something else, because I see musicals constantly in London. And I mean, when we come on to do my London shows episode, you'll hear quite how thoroughly I visit them all. But yeah, I think things like this in Edinburgh are a great opportunity. What I will mention in tandem with this was a show called Blues and Burlesque Hotter Than Hell, which was arguably the first Fringe show I saw, because I saw their London preview at the Leicester Square Theatre, which was on something like the 25th of July. But it was on at the Assembly Bosco tent, and actually that was a really good show. I mean, it was very much in preview in London, because I think it was the first time they performed it. One of the things I liked so much about this was, as well as having the burlesque element to it, it also had this storytelling done through song.
Oh, right, okay.
Which was thoroughly enjoyable. They had a fantastic actor, or singer. He didn't do an awful lot of acting, really, because he was behind the piano the whole way through the show, but sang these sort of narrative songs from back there, whilst then introducing the girls who would then come on and do their sort of particular performance. There were two dancers who sort of had this wonderful sort of almost bitchy sister relation. They weren't. I don't think they were meant to be sisters, but sort of the two performers vying for the central spotlight, if you like, and one was this very elegant, refined girl who actually the dancer auditioned for my play, which is how I found out about the show. Thoroughly delightful girl who did a fantastic production, and the other one of whom was this sort of very in-your-face sort of bitchy character. But that was a fantastic show. I didn't actually see it in Edinburgh. I only saw the preview. I'm very sorry I didn't, actually, because I'd like to have seen it again, once they ironed out the kinks. But very, very good show. But anyway, so that's sort of my burlesque element. Moving on, for anybody who goes up there who is participating and is in musical theatre, for the first year this time they did a Fringe Central event called Musical Theatre in Conversation With. Ooh. And they do these panel conversations, which you can go along to as a participant. And this is the first time they've done it with musical theatre. And they had a panel of 3 or 4, I forget now. Led by Barry Church-Woods, and they had, for example, Alexandra Spencer-Jones, who was the producer of Action to the Word and Dracula. I can't remember who else they had now. My memory is completely failing me on names. But they had a fantastic sort of little chat there for, I think it was an hour. And it was just an opportunity to hear where people had come from, how they got where they were, where they're going next. And then you got questions and the chance to ask, a professional producer or a professional one-man cabaret comedian, okay, what happens in this situation? Or, sometimes the what was your favourite moment type question.
So it's both an interview and a masterclass in a strange sense.
Absolutely. And if you're a participant and you're going up and they do this again, which I sincerely hope they will, I told Barry he has to or I'll disown knowing him. Not that holds any weight, but that I recommend. It was well worthwhile. Next show, Cabaret Bastardo. Now, I saw this on the 19th of August, it's now the 23rd of September, so I've had over a month to consider this, and I'm still not entirely sure I know what I saw. It was one of those truly bizarre shows. It was a cabaret. It was a band of, I'm going to say maybe 7 or 8, including 2 singers, and it told this very dark and bizarre story of this quaint city where lived Adam and Evelyn, I think their names were. It's very unsubtle references here and there. And some fantastic performances in this show. Very dark music. Everybody was from somewhere different. So the lead guy was Portuguese, I think there was an Italian, I think there was a German.
It was a real global gathering.
Yeah, it was almost like an art collective type thing. But it was really dark. There was a moment where a heart got eaten on stage, quite gruesomely, and I mean, goodness only knows what she was actually eating. But it's this very, very dark, creepy. It was almost something about the Sweeney Todd meets Tom Waits.
Oh, right.
Very odd.
Macabre.
Very macabre. Absolutely. They only did 2 performances a week, so they did 6 in the entire thing, and I only saw the very last one, and I wish I could have gone back to see it again.
So much heart in a day.
Quite. But it was so dark, so bizarre, and I think just the sheer oddity of it was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And they had, like, their piano player spent the whole time with a miniature big top covering his entire torso and head. And every now and then a monkey would come out of the big top and play the piano instead of him, like a puppet monkey. Yes. And it was just so peculiar. And I can't do it justice describing it. It just can't be done. But it was amazing. So if you ever see that, cabaret spelt with a K, Bastardo.
The German way of spelling it, I believe.
Yes. If you ever see these guys anywhere near you and you want something a little bit weird, just go and see it and find out for yourself. That's all I can say, because I just can't do it justice. I'd love to know what they describe it as. I didn't get the chance to really ask, but very, very strange. We come on to a show I believe you saw as well, which was another example of potential that wasn't in the room, and that was Coping.
Yes.
Now this was a little bit different. I didn't have this sold to me terribly well, because I was given a flyer that really didn't explain what it was at all.
The flyer was awful. The flyer just had the word coping on it. I seem to
the flyer had the word?
And a little sort of silhouette underneath.
Well, it had a leaf.
A leaf, yes.
It had a leaf, and that was the entire image, was this blank white flyer with the word coping at the top, the leaf in the middle, and the space details at the bottom. And the blurb on the back, now this I thought was terrible, because I sent a message to Nick saying I've just been fired for a new musical called Coping. It's something about how two people deal with getting over something or blah blah blah, and he sent to me back, that's the one about the lesbian relationships, isn't it? And I went, no, I don't think so, because this wasn't mentioned anywhere on the flyer, and yet that's the whole point. And I thought that was, the advertising for this show was terrible. They entirely missed everything that they were trying to promote, and I think that did them a grave injustice.
It certainly set up the audience for not really knowing what they were getting, because I'm in the same way as you. I went to see it on the strength of the blurb, and what it turned out to be was, it was a cast of 6 backed by a woman on a guitar who played the whole score.
And you had the chap as well, the father.
Oh, there was one fella.
There was one fella, yeah.
But the essential plot, such as it was that 4 of the women had been in relationships, i.e. 2 couples, and had broken up, and now you were seeing them after the breakup, with some flashbacks to before the breakup.
Well, this was one thing I wasn't entirely sure of. Wasn't it that 3 of them had been in relationships? Because 2 of them broke up, but the other one didn't. It sounded to me like the girlfriend died. Because wasn't there a car crash right at the beginning of the piece?
I must say, I can't remember.
I think we're very much hitting on one of the show's biggest problems.
It was not clear.
They tried to take everything out of temporal order.
Yeah.
They kept flashing back to what these relationships were like when they were happening, and that was a colossal mistake.
Only because it wasn't clear what was going on.
Exactly.
It can be done. I just don't think
it can be done very well, but the way that the story was written, you got this sense that I keep going on about, that there was actually a really interesting and heartfelt story in there, but it didn't come across. And my big problem was that the people I felt for the whole way through the piece were not the people you were meant to feel for.
No, I agree with that.
I felt for the dad who didn't know how to deal with his lesbian daughter, which I actually thought he played very, very well. This awkwardness and the hostility that gradually turned to this sort of increase of understanding and acceptance was very, very well done. The slightly sort of different... The one that didn't fit in... Well, she fitted in with the group as friends, but she was the one that looked like she should be with a different group, if you know what I mean. So I can't find the right word to describe it. But she was a very believable character, and she was just a best friend of one of them. Whereas I felt like the couples didn't sell me.
No.
And I think this is another one where if they... And I'm assuming, again, a budgetary constraint here, if they've been able to get the professional actors, and I think it would have really helped the show. And I also think that reorganising the story a little bit to make it, and perhaps actually just the acting would have cleared up some of the confusion.
I think it needed a bit more dramaturgy myself. I think it was a couple of drafts short of the final version, but there we go.
I think so. But I think there's a great deal of potential in that show. We just didn't see it.
Yeah.
But it was the concept intrigued me. I think the story has the potential to be extremely touching and actually very effective. I think some of the issues they began to touch on go deep, especially the dad, but the dad was the only one that was fully realised.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because although at one level it was very brave, I thought the fact that the couples were all gay couples, female gay couples, was interesting, but of course actually ultimately for the most part irrelevant, in the sense it was really about relationships.
Yes.
The gender and the nature of those relationships, apart from being loving or failed relationships, was what it was really all about.
Absolutely.
But I don't think it was more than the sum of its pieces.
No, I think not. And unfortunately, it was a bit predictable.
Yeah, I have very little more to say about it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I do too. I mean, 5 minutes in, I guessed how it was going to end, which I think says a lot about it, which is a great shame. But if they keep working, I think they should keep working on it, and I think they should make it into something a little bit more polished. And I think there's a good show in there. But unfortunately, it wasn't at Edinburgh. So moving on to something that I found a little bit of an enigma. I don't know if you saw this, and that was departures.
No, I didn't. I interviewed the gentleman on the street, so I'm very interested to hear your view on this song cycle.
Now, I think I heard part of your interview. Now, I've been neglecting my musical talk duties terribly, in the sense that I've only heard a couple of your Edinburgh episodes in the last few days. So I've heard a bit of that. I think it's the episode I'm listening to at the moment. But I found potential not in the room again.
Oh.
And I seem to be at odds here, because the reviews they received have been stellar, and I just didn't see it. I felt there were a couple of actors that let the show down. and I think they when they got their key moments, they pulled my suspension of disbelief away.
Oh, right.
And I felt I was in an acted show rather than being enwrapped in this sort of interesting world. In some ways, it's similar to a show that we're about to talk about, should be my next one, very briefly, which is the set that it was based around transport.
Yeah, and a failure at transport, wasn't it?
A failure at transport, yes. It was all about a delayed train, and it's the friendships that people make on the platform while they're all waiting for this train, and they've all got their individual problems, which one of the other people helps them to sort out, and this kind of stuff. And there's the couple that end up making out at the back because they found a common item, and there's the person who's really awkward who sort of begins to come out of his shell a little bit. The problem was I felt like it didn't focus on the social aspect enough, and yet it was trying to be about that. And I found... Now I did actually get the soundtrack, and what I haven't done yet is what I meant to do before we had this conversation, which was listen to the show again. But with Out of the Lens, I haven't had a chance, and I'm going to do that. And maybe I'll retract this statement in a little while if another listen. Maybe I saw a duff performance. I did see it right towards the end of the Fringe, and they might have been suffering a little. I don't know. I felt like I kept getting hints, little musical hints and little lyrical hints that there was some genius in there that I wasn't seeing. And I don't quite know. Now, this is the thing. It's become such a thing for me to be saying this about this Fringe, and it's about plays as well. It's not just about the musicals I've seen, although that's what we're discussing today. I'm wondering if I'm being overly harsh. But I walked in there and I just felt... I came out and I thought, that was enjoyable, that was interesting, but I felt like I've just seen something... And I'm not going to want to see it again. I'm not really interested in pursuing it.
Is it the old thing, incident without reason, or incident without meaning?
Yes.
That things happened, and it tied itself up in whatever way it tied itself up in, but actually it didn't amount to very much when you look at it.
I think so. You know, it's a harsh thing to say. I don't know how much of it was down to the couple of people who kept pulling my attention. There was one actor who didn't have an awful lot to do throughout a lot of the piece, and I found quite distracting. They looked bored a couple of times. I think probably in character, fidgeted just enough to pull attention. I felt like the songs were quite repetitive. Now, I may retract all of this once I've actually had a chance to listen to the recording again and see if I can study it a little bit more. But I just felt like it was a good show. No, I felt like it was a great show wrapped up in a good show. Possibly even a mediocre one. And I don't quite understand that, because I sort of came out feeling like it should have been something more.
Well, can I ask you a question? Because what's interesting is you've been talking about it as a musical and as a show all the way through, but they were at pains to point out to me, but it was a song cycle.
Well, yes, and actually, to be fair, I'm using the word musical incorrectly. It was a song cycle.
Oh, it was a song
yes.
cycle, right, okay.
And that's another mistake we're about to mention. They advertised themselves as a song cycle, but the actors flyered it saying it was a musical.
Right.
And yet the flyer categorically states song cycle. And I know for a fact a couple of people I spoke to got a bit bemused by that. The flyer was correct, the actors were wrong. I don't know why they were trying to sell it as a musical, and if anybody went thinking it was, they were going to get a grave injustice, because there's no way it could be considered a musical. Sorry, I'm aware, I think it's because we're just talking about so many musicals, I've got the term stuck in my head. It was a song cycle. I think the problem was perhaps that they focused too much on trying to make everything too thematic and not enough about its own individual soul. I think that's what was really missing. That's why I think, yes, in fact, the more I'm talking about it, the more I'm hearing this in my own voice. It was the soul that was missing. It was a great show that had no soul.
Oh, that's not a quotation for the poster, though, is it?
It's not, unfortunately. And I think if they could have just found that soul, it would have been an amazing show. And I think, they had a couple of 4 and 5 star reviews, and I saw the potential for them, but I didn't see the show that went with it.
Well, that's possible. As you say, you might have seen a Duff performance, but...
Very, very... I'm always willing to leave that as a caveat. And I'm always willing to say, yes, it's... Now, there are some shows that, I might have seen and say this is a 1 or a 2 star, but it deserves a 3. But this was very much a 3 star that I felt like it could be a 4 or a 5.
But you liked it enough to acquire the album?
Well, I saw enough potential in it to acquire the album. And it's quite... And to be fair, they were selling it was only £5.
Yeah.
A very reasonable price. And I thought, you know what? It's worth that
For analysis.
For analysis, to see if my judgment was correct.
But thematically, it was connecting with the next one we're going to be talking about.
It did, which I'm going to gloss over fairly quickly because I didn't enjoy it that much, but I do think it had a couple of standout elements. One is a mistake, and I've been saving this for now, but this jumps back to our advertising thing. Yeah. It categorically advertised itself on the flyers as a musical, and it was not. It was a song cycle. And
this one too?
This one too.
And are we going to name it?
It's Circle Line. Yeah. And that shot it in the foot straight away because I went in expecting a musical and I didn't get one. This is the story of a bunch of people who are trapped in a tunnel on a Circle Line train. And it's not going anywhere, and they've all got problems, and they all try and help each other sort them out. Although in this case, although it sort of ends on a happy-go-lucky number, not everybody's problems are actually resolved, which I like.
Yes, how like real life.
I think the fact that actually one of Departure's weak points was the fact that everybody's problem did get solved, and I thought, well, hang on a minute, there's nothing left here except, there's no empty chairs, empty tables moment. It's all happy-go-lucky ending, which I know that's a nice way to end a show, but it's not terribly realistic, and for a show that seemed to be driving for realism, that fell flat.
And they were all reprimanded when they got in late to the office.
Quite. Circle Line did do that, but the problem was that it wasn't terribly realistic. It was very heightened. There was a big jazz dance number in the middle of it, which was an unfortunate choice that was not really a choice. It had to be that way because that's the way the lyrics drove the song. Now, I was not terribly impressed with the show, but I was extremely impressed with the composer, who is a young gentleman, 21 if memory serves, by the name of Kieran Walsh. And he is one to look out for. He got a little bit of a rough end of a stick with this show in that he had to take on a lot more responsibility than he intended to. He came in as the MD composer and ended up producing, lighting, doing various bits and pieces too.
Advertising too, which is where
advertising as well. Yes, absolutely. And that was a little tricky. And I think he had a bit of a rough fringe in that sense. But as a composer, he is one to watch. He wrote some really interesting music. He was a little bit, I think, hamstrung in that the lyrics didn't lend themselves to a consistent theme, which is where this random jazz number came from. But the random jazz number was very good. He has a lot of influences. I've met up with him. I've had conversations with him since. We actually went to go and see Dogfight last week as we talk. And I've spoken to him a lot, and he has a lot of ethnic influences, which didn't really come out in this, but I think would be fascinating study for his future work when he starts writing his own stuff.
In the short conversation I had with him on the Royal Mile, he sounds very much like a sort of young fusion composer.
Yes, I think that's very much what he's going to be, and I think if he follows that, he's going to have a very, very strong USP.
Selling point.
Yes.
Just say it.
I think he's one to watch out for. I really enjoyed the music in the piece. Nick and myself stayed behind afterwards to have a chat with him and understand the show a little bit more, and coming out of that, we both came out saying he needs to do his own work and see. I've very much encouraged him to go the cabaret route and see if he can just write just a bunch of songs for the purposes of the experience, because I think it's a great way to start out.
A Tin Pan Alley album, as it were.
Absolutely. And if he comes out with one of those people, go and see it, because I've got a feeling it's actually going to be really good. I'm going to leave talking about the show there, just because I think that was the standout element for me. But it was a really impressive one. So yes, that's Circle Line. I then saw yet another potential Not in the Room show called Jack and I, which was a Jack the Ripper musical.
And I couldn't get to see it, but it was by the same people who'd written Guido the musical last year, which I did see, which was a Guy Fawkes musical.
Right, and what did you think of that? Because we've mentioned previously 0 attendance last year for me because I was in Canada, which made August very odd. I got very twitchy. I had this feeling I should be somewhere else, even though I was enjoying myself out there. But I was definitely missing the Fringe. But yes, so what out of interest? Because I obviously missed any comments on that.
Well, I didn't review it last year. I enjoyed it after a fashion, I think. This is the Guido musical. It had a certain amount of bounce and brio. But as the way I remember it, it had a sort of a young cast who did what they could with it. But it needs to go another step to become a lot more professional.
Then I'm going to second that for Jack and I. It very much looks like what they're probably doing then is they're producing a new show every year, and because they're not working on anything, it comes in a sort of workshop stage.
Yes.
They obviously, they're all young, they obviously don't have much of a backing. And actually, I can forgive.
Yeah, so can I.
The fact that they... Well, I mean, we use boxes for our thing, but ours was slightly more purpose. These very much had stuff pasted on them to make them look like a brick wall or a desk or something like that, which didn't really... it was done very rough and ready. And that I can forgive, absolutely. I think the show felt like a workshop. And I think that a little bit more study would make it a lot better. And I think also they made it too self-aware. There was a continuing gag where somebody came in on a scooter with a motorcycle sound effect who was meant to be a punk character, and at one point was about to cycle off and called out to the techie asking for her sound effect.
Oh, I see. Right.
And it broke the show a little bit. I think if they dropped some of the self-aware gags and came back with the same show next year rather than trying to write a new one and worked on it, they'd have a great production. As it was, I think they had something that just kept hinting at how good it could be, but never really achieved it. But I think they're a group worth following. I can't remember the name of the company, but I think they're a group worth keeping an eye on if they can just push themselves that next step. I absolutely agree with you on that. And so after that, I went to go and see Saucy Jack and the Space Vixens.
And what a good show that is.
Oh, brilliant. I heard you... I know that this is something you've seen, I believe it was in Edinburgh in 2010.
Another production, yes. But
yes.
It's the first time I'd seen it, and I thought immediately, this is a really good show. For me, it's the Rocky Horror Show for people who don't necessarily like the Rocky Horror Show.
Yeah, well, Rocky Horror Show's science fiction as well, but it's the space opera. Yeah. It's the Star Trek Rocky Horror Show, essentially. Much more spaceship-based and all about this sort of interstellar...
I think it's funnier.
I actually think it's a lot fun. I think the Rocky Horror Show is fun. Space Vixens is funny.
Yeah.
And I heard you talk about it when I came to jump onto Musical Talk in 2011. I listened to the 2010 episodes to get a gist of the show, and I heard you talk about it then, and I remember thinking this is something I'd love to see, and of course it hasn't been on since.
No, it has not.
But it was finally, and I saw it. It was my last. I saw it on the night of the 24th, the Sunday.
Oh.
So it was my sort of last hurrah, because I wanted to wait.
Swan song.
Well, I wanted to wait until I didn't have anything to promote the next morning, because it did run 11 o'clock till 1 o'clock. So it is a late show, but it's just stunning and wonderful, just kind of cheesy disco awesomeness, really.
That is a review.
Yeah, it was an absolutely brilliant show. I mean, the sort of what's the correct word for it? The not title song, but the central song of the whole piece of Glitter Boots Saved My Life.
Which is a great song in its own right.
It's a wonderful song.
And had beautiful choreography as the three Space Vixens had turned up and sang their song. But they were in a little sort of triangle. When it was each one's verse, they were moved to the front and the other two would rearrange behind, but they were all doing simpatico choreography. It was just beautiful. And my word, they were... All human life was there. I mean...
totally.
At the end of the day, there's a gay couple, a lesbian couple, a straight couple.
You've got everything.
Dark, blonde, buxom, slim. The casting alone was pretty much...
Well, and what amazed me, with one exception, I thought all the costumes were stunning. All the costumes were stunning, really, but there was one character who I felt half their costume was always a bit wrong, and that was the cowboy biker character, whose bottom half... No, sorry. Which way round is it? Top half always looked amazing, and bottom half I wondered where the costuming came from, because it seemed somewhat at odds with everything else. But stunning costume. Actually, some of the best technical work I saw at the Fringe, the lighting in that was so precise. And of course a wonderful setting, because this was in just the fancy room. Fancy room? Or the big room?
The Snake was in... Snakes was
in the fancy... No, it's just the big room.
Just the tonic, which is basically a series of stone vaults.
Yes, which have the one problem... which joke was made very effectively in Snakes, which is that it's hotter than the sun in there.
Yes.
But it doesn't really matter, really, because you just sort of sit there and enjoy yourself, and then you come out and die. But it was wonderful because it was essentially done in traverse.
Yes.
But it was done in rather extraordinary traverse that had a mini sort of stage either end. Yeah. One of which was the bar itself, which was a genuine functional bar, and the other which
drinks in the interval. Yeah.
Yes, and the other one of which was an actual stage. But I just everything about it was.
By chance, I sat in the exact middle against one of the walls, so I had probably the best view.
Oh, nice! I was a little bit towards the stage end.
I think I could even smell the sequins on the lycra, and they were on a hell of a strain in one or two cases.
And what I
male
liked,
and female.
Yeah, quite. And what I liked, which I didn't really clock, was that they were absolutely free about how you took that show. There were people taking photographs the whole way through. Now, this started out just being... There's a press photographer who took a couple of pictures of me as Mr. Millennium a couple of years ago, who I recognised, and then gradually more and more people started getting their cameras out. I wish I'd clocked earlier that you could do that, because I had my full-on camera with me.
In the interval, some of the cast members were posing for photographs.
Well, yes, and that's where I started to catch on that they were cool with this, but it was actually mid-show.
Yeah.
And I have a few mid-show photographs of it, because it was wonderful and very much lent itself. But what a show.
Yeah.
I bought the soundtrack off that without a second's hesitation. I actually met the guy who was playing Saucy Jack at a producer's brunch, and it was already on his list to come and see Out of the Lens, but he then met me and made an absolute point of it, and then we sort of shared, and I've stayed in contact with him since, although we haven't met up since, but he's a very nice chap. But yeah, fabulous show. But my final musical was on the same day as that, which was The Girl Who. Now, did you get to see this?
No, I didn't.
Because I know you try and see the RCS ones, don't you?
I do, and usually I do. This year I got to see The Addams Family, which was their big piece, and I interviewed two of the cast members afterwards, and it was lovely. A brilliant production of what I think is actually a flawed show, but the production was excellent. But I asked them the question. I said, usually the Royal Scottish Conservatoire produces two new bits of writing, if you like, to run in parallel. So half the cast do one and half the cast do the other, and then everyone joins together for the main show, which is the showcase. And I said, this is the first year you don't appear to have done that for some time. Instead, we're getting The Girl Who, which is new writing, but it's new writing by the same people who did both the shows, the new writing shows last year. So usually they give it out to two different people, or two different groups. Last year they just got one set of writers to do both Wolf Boy and Freak Show, I think it was called, with mixed results, I must say. I wasn't that excited by the two new bits of writing last year, so I was slightly put off by the idea of The Girl Who this year, because I knew it was by the same people. But the reason they said they'd only done the one rather than two is because it was a kind of make-your-own adventures. So it had lots of multiple endings and multiple, the audience could pick what they wanted, and as a result, it took up the resources of two new shows to run one new show, which is why they only did one. So just having said that in context, I didn't get to see it. What did you think?
Wonderful.
Oh, right.
I really, really enjoyed it. I think, it's as a concept, it's amazing. It's very, very brave. The concept was brilliant, and actually I thought they did a really good job writing the show. The concept was that there were about, I think maybe 15 locations on a map, and the girl is trying to find her parents who she's disappeared off to this other world, and she's trying to find her way back, and the audience determines how everything works out. And it literally starts from the moment you hand your ticket to the person and walk into the theatre, because it was in the Spiegelten, Assembly Gardens, which as you walk in, there's
it's a big
panel in front
of top, essentially.
It is a big top, but there's a panel in front of you, so you have to walk either left or right, and which way you went made one of the decisions already. And then there were things, again, I won't go on about it because it's in the interview, but there were things like she had to choose whether to lie or tell the truth. And they got two guys up on stage, one was truth, one was lying, and they arm wrestled, and whoever won, that's how... So it wasn't always a choice. It was sometimes the outcome of a test, which actually in some way almost mirrored the trials that she was going through, which I thought was really good fun.
Sometimes a bit arbitrary then.
Yeah. One of the audience members went up and played noughts and crosses with one of the cast, and who won determined where she ended up. And basically the concept was that there was a song for every location, plus a few extras. But the locations were these very elaborate changes. So there's one where she was the first choice is she either goes up or down, and if she goes down a burrow, and they had one of these extending tunnels, and she'd walk through it, come to the other end, and they run around and put it down, and so she crawled through it again, and sometimes they picked her up and carried her in it, and it was this very dynamic physical show. But of course it has this fascinating thing, which I discussed with the writers, that some of the cast don't get their big song one night, because everyone has a song, and they said in the interview one of the things they'd probably do is have a smaller cast singing more parts, because the big problem is, if they had somebody who had their agent in and they didn't get their big song picked, nothing you can do about it.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you then. Was this more of a showcase for the writers than it was for the performers? And in which case...
In the sense that some performers didn't get to showcase each night, yes. So I suppose it probably was, although some of the stuff was very, very impressive. I was a huge Choose Your Own Adventure fan, so there's a small part of me that may be swayed by the fact that they just melded two of my favourite things together.
But if you said that, now go to page 34.
Yes, quite. But I did very much enjoy it. I came out with a big grin on my face. I'd like to see it again.
Was it yours?
Yes, not the Cheshire Cat. I did see this on the 25th. So it was the very last day of the Fringe, and I had no chance to go back again. I would be interested to know if I came out. And apparently also, that very first decision, not the going in the door one, but whether she goes up or down, which is the first decision, not the first decision you make as the audience, but the first decision you see the outcome of, changes the score.
Oh, does it?
If she goes up, it's a much lighter show than if she goes down. So apparently the orchestra actually had two scores, and that first decision then determined which one they read from, which is quite interesting. But I'll leave the rest of my interview to do the talking, but suffice it to say I very much enjoyed it, but I would very much like to have a second viewing to get over my childhood obsession with Choose Your Own Adventure and see if the show is as good as I think it was. But on a first viewing, it was excellent.
Once again, though, there's a question, which is, this is a good example of a show with a gimmick.
Yes.
But is the gimmick overwhelming the quality of the show? And once again, because you only saw it once, I think it's the same answer. You need to see it twice in order to work out whether what you were seeing was any good, or whether you were just still being swept away by the dexterousness of the plotting,
absolutely,
and the gimmick. And
one thing that reflects on the cast as well as the writers is that they are all excellent storytellers. I mean, this was a masterclass in storytelling in many ways, because they are crafting the story that night. Yes, when you get to that location, they know exactly what's going to happen up until the next decision, but they still sold it. And they really sold the decisions. And actually, the girl who played the girl, whose name completely escapes me, as in the character, I don't think I remember her real name, was superb. Like, she really sold her choices. There's a certain amount to which she couldn't emote to the extent that she might do if she was put in that circumstance for real, but bearing in mind she's on the hop the whole time, changing from emotion to emotion and finding out, not through her own decision but through someone else's decision, whether she lies or whether she gets thrown in prison or whether she manages to escape from the pirates.
She's very much a reactive character in a way.
And I mean, everyone does that to an extent, but everyone else does that by adopting their new persona. There's only a couple of characters who return, but she's the whole way through, and she was stunning. Absolute kudos to her. But yes, which brings me to, well, my final show with an honorary mention, and this we're coming up now to my pick of the Fringe, and therefore to anybody who's clocked what I've talked about already in the sequence of the Fringe musical talks, not in this episode as of yet, it will come as no surprise that my pick of the Fringe was Dracula,
which we've discussed.
I have discussed. I spoke to Alexandra Spencer-Jones and John O'Davis and Claire Petzel, which interview anybody who's listened to this whole series will already have heard. I saw that on the Saturday, so I saw the news review the day I arrived. So that's the very, very first thing I saw, and I saw this 2 days later than that. So that was Saturday the 2nd, and it's stuck in my memory for the entire damn Fringe, and I still can't quite get it out. I thought the quality of that production was just so high. Alexandra mentioned in our interview that the cast went through the mill to get their parts, and it shows that they were that rigorous. The quality of each performer was amazing. The commitment and the drive of each performer was amazing. And quite frankly, the scale of the show was almost bigger than you would... Well, it was bigger than you would expect for the Fringe. I do not know to this day how they got that set down in 11 minutes. It looks like something that would take half an hour to assemble. And the work that went into that was just brilliant. I can't really sell it enough, except I can't work out what the hell to call it. The narrowest definition, I spent a lot of time, the whole way through the Fringe, every time I recommended it, I narrowed my definition a little bit. And what I think I finally came up with was an actor muso, steampunk, not quite jukebox, rock opera play with songs.
Well, there's a genre. Was there anything else that fell into that genre?
Not that I'm aware of, no. But, I mean, Action to the Word is a company I cannot stress highly enough that people should keep their eyes on. I mean, they've been touring with this very physical theatre, Clockwork Orange, for some years, which I never saw, but I know its reputation.
I know its sequel, The Chocolate Orange.
Oh, goodness. But yes, I know that by reputation. I knew I was going into something with a company with a pedigree. But obviously it's a brand new show, and you've no idea what it's going to be like. And I only heard the pedigree, I hadn't experienced it for myself. And I was not disappointed in any way. It's one of those rare things where I feel like a Fringe show gets hyped up so much and then lives up to the hype. But it was Marmite. They had walkouts. I think what they were proud of, actually, was the fact that they didn't have anyone that sat there bored in it. They either stayed and loved it or they walked out.
You were in or you were out, but you were nowhere in the middle, yes.
I've never seen a Fringe audience get to its feet so fast at the end of a show. Everybody that stayed behind it absolutely adored it. It was a stellar piece of theatre. I think my interview probably says everything that needs to be said about it, really. But yeah, that just stayed in my mind for the entire Fringe.
So it's a show for which you give fangs.
He's here all week too.
David, it's lovely talking to you.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for illuminating some of the corners of the Fringe which I didn't get to see.
Indeed.
It's good to hear a different voice on Musical Talk. It's certainly good to hear where you and I did see a show, but in different performances.
Yes.
To see where we touch base and where we don't.
Indeed.
So until we speak again, David, thanks very much and speak to you soon.
My very pleasure.
I like a challenge. We'll see what you think in a while. Distant. You are so very distant. I have never met a man quite so oblivious as you. There is a world out there, a world I would display, but there is only one simple thing you have to do. Look up and see the world I want to show you. Look up and let me take you by the hand. Throw the doors wide open that keep you locked away, and you'll see the horizon where you stand. There is so much waiting for you, and it all depends on me getting that head of yours out of the lens. Gentle, you are so very gentle. You just need the courage to step forth from darkness into light. I can see it in your eyes, a yearning to explore, and I can promise you new adventures every night. Look up and I will lead you off the pathway. I'll take you to a place you do not know. This is just the start of your illumination. Allow me and I will begin the show. No one said that this was easy, everyone pretends, and yet it's just a single step out of the lens. I know that you want to, but it's just that you're afraid. But tell me, so next time it's not so hard. The day that one admits they're hiding, that's when he ascends and welcomes what he truly is. Out of the lands.
This episode of Musical Talk presented by Thos Ribbits and David Kingsmill, and edited by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2014, except for the songs where the copyright remains with the creators David Kingsmill and Nick Chave. And my thanks to them both for letting me play extracts of their brand new album recording of Out of a Lens in this programme.
But if your poacher is... poacher? Got eggs on the brain. If your poster is generally dark...
Scrambled ones at that, I think.